going to hear from the Secretary of the United Firefighters Union of SA.
We are. The Firefighters Union has taken the MFS and the state government to the Employment Tribunal. There was a decision and some orders handed down last week regarding a travel allowance. Now, let's remind people, there's about 1,000 firefighters in South Australia. These are men and women that run towards danger when so many of us are trying to get away from it. And as part of one of their entitlements is a travel allowance. Now, to explain to us what has been going on, Max Adlam joins us. Good morning to you, Max.
Good morning, Rory.
Max, explain to us exactly what this travel allowance is, who's it for, and what do you say has been happening to it in recent months?
Sure. Look, there are a range of travel allowances, but essentially the MFS direct people to a particular location, and there's an expectation that they use their own vehicle and pay for their fuel and so on. And there are varying levels of allowance depending on if they're travelling with their gear and so on. So, you know, it is reasonably complicated allowance, but had been paid up until about August of last year. And unfortunately, it just stopped being paid, and members reported it to us. We raised it with the employer. We were told, look, no worries, we'll get it, we'll look into that, we'll get it fixed. We got varying assurances that the matter was being dealt with through a promise that by the end of November everybody would be paid up. That didn't happen. Lots more mistakes were made. Then we got another commitment about December, and then we got a commitment about January, then February, and as in April we still had that kind of correspondence coming to us. But what we were concerned about was it appears that very little resource was being put in. In last year, I think it was about 9 hours a week, and then that increased to about 12 hours a week.
So, Max Adlam, how much are we talking here that people are out of pocket?
We're talking overall hundreds of thousands of dollars, Rory. Some people, it's a small amount. For other people, it's a very large amount.
Because one number I've heard put forward is $30,000 for one particular claim. Is that your understanding?
I understand that is correct, yes.
So Max,
I don't...
you say you haven't been paid. Have you taken the government to any form of tribunal?
Yes, we did. We made an application for orders to try and get the matter dealt with expeditiously. We'd met them. We went through mediation a couple of weeks ago, and frankly, it wasn't, you know, they just weren't prepared really to budge. I think the offer they made was, we'd pay interest, but we'd consider that if you withdraw your application. Well, that really wasn't very good. And then on top of the not paying of the allowances, we estimate they've spent about $20,000 on the lawyers to run the case against us, throwing good money essentially after bad. It just doesn't make any sense.
So, Max, it sounds like there's been some sort of resolution to this. What do you think this says, though, the way this has been handled, about the way firefighters are treated or considered by the state government?
Look, it's just one of a range of things that's going on at the moment that shows that they are simply not respected. And as far as the government goes, you know, they know about this. They allow their bureaucrats to carry on like this. They said when they were elected they would bring in wage theft laws that exist for private employers. They haven't done so. And now they have arrogant indifference.
So if this was a private employer, would this be considered wage theft?
Yeah, absolutely. It is wage theft. They owe people money that our members have expended to carry out the business of the fire and rescue service, and they are not being reimbursed that money.
Now we have contacted both the Industrial Relations Minister Kaya Ma and the Minister for Emergency Services Emily Burke about this matter. They are both welcome to come and put their side of the story forward at this point in time.
Why were they fighting it, Max? If you were owed these allowances and you say they were slow to process, what were their what was their beef with you?
Well, it never really became clear. They just said it was complex and hard, and they didn't have the resources, and they didn't want to pay interest. They told us they couldn't pay interest.
Would that argument work with a private employer, that it was too hard to work out the allowances?
No. Look, it's clearly spurious, but it does reflect what's going on, unfortunately, across the sector. And we call upon the government to really get involved, understand what's going on and do better.
Well, we do have Kaya Ma has called in. He is the Industrial Relations Minister on this issue. Kaya Ma, welcome. You've heard from Max Adlam. She's been reasonably strident in her claim, saying that, this could almost equate to wage theft and that the government has spent $20,000 on lawyers. What would you respond?
Oh, g'day, guys. And I didn't have the opportunity to hear most of what Max said, I'm afraid. But wage theft, as it's generally understood and defined in the Commonwealth law, is the deliberate and systematic withholding or underpaying of wages. I don't think that applies in the case we're talking about. I understand this was an administrative error that saw travel allowances that had previously been paid through an administrative error stop being paid. I'm advised that the government has acknowledged that was a mistake, that for some, about 6,000 claims, all but about 500 really complex travel claims have been paid, and the government and the MFS is absolutely committed to doing so.
Is it good enough, though, Attorney General, for an administrative error to drag on for more than 6 months?
I've got to say, Rory, no, it's not ideal. I am informed that the ones that are outstanding are particularly complicated claims, but the government will absolutely and the MFS work to resolve those and in the timeframes that the SARB said. So this isn't a deliberate scheme by the state government to underpay wages. It was a mistake. The vast majority have been rectified, and certainly with the final amount of working to be done now.
So if it was a mistake, would you concede that interest should be paid on the amount that is outstanding?
I'll have to get some advice on that, Sonya. As I said, I'm just coming on your show with not having heard everything that's happened, but often in some of these cases, interests are paid depending on the circumstance.
Well, Max also said that that it's not resourced well enough, that there's only someone working 9 to 12 hours a week on these kind of issues, and maybe you need to kick in more hours. Is that something you'd consider?
Well, Jules, my understanding is there are about 6,000 of these claims, and all but about 500, the complicated ones, are being paid. So it is a mistake that has been acknowledged. It's a mistake that has now largely been rectified, but will be work to be done as soon as possible for the rest of them.
I understand you need to go very quickly, but as the Industrial Relations Minister and as a person who has a husband who runs a small business, if the state government's workers can't work out complicated award conditions to pay them, what hope does a private person have?
There are awards, Sonya, that apply to every worker around Australia. What wage theft laws are designed to protect against is that deliberate underpayment or that deliberate withholding of payment. And we've seen it in some areas like retail or hospitality, where it's actually the part of the business model that someone sets up to underpay their workers, and it's that deliberate, systematic underpayment of wages that wage theft laws come into play with.
Kaya Ma, thank you for your company, and thank you to Max Adlam, who is Secretary of the Firefighters Union of South Australia. It is 17 minutes tonight.